What's another one? Let's talk about, again, you talked about communications. There's formal communication and there's informal communication. My international students tell me they find it very difficult when they get their job. When I talk about international South Asians in particular, they get into a job. Till today, in some countries, we call our bosses by sir and madam. We don't address them by their first name. And in Canada, we call our bosses by their first name. They find that adjustment very difficult, the formal communication and the informal communication. And they slowly have to learn that in an organization, it takes away from hierarchy when you're, formal and informal. So you call your boss by the first name. Even your teacher, they would always call me teacher, ma'am, and I would tell them, you can call me Miss Fernandez. But sometimes it sounds great to be called Professor Fernandez if you want to keep that respect. And then when they graduate, they all start calling me Rose-marie. So you become informed.
We asked this question in recent past. You were in Cartagena, Colombia, and you have been going there for both work and leisure. What happened that was unusual and different from the culture of the West, and how did you cope the language of the communication? Of course, you learned Spanish.
Colombia and I have a totally different relationship. It's from many, many years. It dates back to maybe before some people were born, in 1986. It was another development country, like where I come from. With a name like Fernandez, is easy for me to assimilate. But in my own preference, my own cultural orientation that I have, that environment suits me. And so I would go every year. And then for many, many years, I didn't go because I was in another part of the world where it wasn't so amenable for me to go to Colombia. But yes, my recent over there is also, I've learned that adapting to a culture, when you're in there for a while, it makes it so much more pleasurable. You get to know people more. You get involved with them. So their culture, their orientation to time, the informal, I'm not talking about the explicit things of music and dance and art and all that one might associate. I'm talking about how people even do their business. Like in their culture, I have two friends, I've talked about this before. I have two girlfriends over there that make tons of money. Neither one of them, they don't have a coach, and they don't do any advertising on the internet. One runs an Airbnb. She has repeat customers from 30 years. The other one runs a jewelry store. She too has repeat customers. They created their reputation, and they don't even do much marketing and sales. But that's the orientation, and that's how they do business, right? So those are some of the lessons I learned. And hey, their orientation to time is that it's plentiful. So they're not in a rush. They're not in a rush to do anything. It's very informal, if I had to say, in the orientation here. They are very, systemic, maybe a little bit analytical. They are collectivistic. They are not competitive. They like to collaborate. They like to do things in groups, teams, whatever you can call it. So that was my learning from my trip there recently.
How does the cultural context influence the interpretation of messages?
Well,
and how can one communicate effectively within varying cultural context?
Well, the CUF assessment. The CUF assessment, designed by Philippe Rosinski, addresses that issue of the context. So, we have in communication patterns, we have high context and low context. Okay, we use body language to explain. We're very animated, Some people aren't. Okay? That's the way it is. That's their preferred style of communicating. We're direct or we're indirect. We can be affective or neutral. And affective means, I'm just going to read it from here. Affective is to display emotions and warmth, touching and so on. In some of our upbringings and our experiences, that's a no-no. We are even raised to, you don't look into the eyes of somebody in authority, somebody that's older than you. You don't look into their eyes and speak, right? And sometimes also when we're formal, informal. And I remember in one of the jobs that I had where I headed up multiculturalism as a human resource director, I could give you an example. I must have been all of 35 when I was that director. I was the youngest director. My peers were all pre-retirement, going into their 60s and so on. And we'd get together for a meeting, and they were all Canadian white women, if you were to look at them. And I'd go into the meeting and they would talk about their grandchildren, the cottage, how it was there. And here's me, the immigrant 35. What cottage? What grandchildren? I was quiet, but I'm the HR director. And so I'm supposed to share, I'm supposed to talk, and they're all older than me. My head would be down. I wouldn't say anything. And I'm sharing a story here. So one day, the head of the YWCA comes from Geneva. And she came and she did a talk. And someone asked her, what challenges did you have in your role? And she said, I learned something. In my culture, we don't have eye contact, we don't smile, we don't shake hands, especially for people in authority, we don't do that. And she said, I realized I can't be effective unless I became assertive. And so she took assertiveness training. Well, guess what I did when I got out of there? The YWCA offered assertiveness training courses. I took about 2 or 3 of them, then I started teaching it, and then so it became a part of me. But assertiveness skills certainly helps you improve your communication in a cultural context. Now you sent me a last question, right?
Yeah. What are some best practices for promoting inclusivity?
Well, if I had to think about best practices, is that it has to start from the top. And just hiring a bunch of people that come from different countries, giving them jobs and bringing them in is not the answer. You have to understand where they come from. You have to, the COF assessment designed by Philippe Rosinski brings all these different factors to light. For example, it might sound like it's best practice. Oh, we have like maybe the open concept in an office, and you're working in an open concept. And you say, oh, it's open door. People can come and talk to me whenever they want. Isn't that exciting? But there are some cultures to go and talk to your boss openly where everybody else can see you is frightening. And they also consider maybe shameful. They think that maybe I've done something wrong. The whole world can see me talking to my boss. They have a hierarchical, raised with a hierarchical orientation. So they don't want to go. Normally it's considered punitive if you're seen talking to your boss. So maybe that won't work well with that person. So you have to be open. Some people will come to your desk. Some people won't. You have to say, okay, let's go have a coffee. Have the privacy to talk to them, to encourage them, to motivate them. So these are some of the little things that, one can incorporate in best practices. Of course, the big word I use is awareness. The more you learn about yourself, all assessment tools are designed to create awareness. And the big factor that the COF does in its assessment, it reveals your own personal orientation. And then when you do it with a team, you can see how we are different from each other and how we can work with each other.